After feeding the parking meter, Charlie makes his way up to the rooftop, setting himself up with a rifle while keeping a steady watch on the street far below. Through the scope, he locks onto his first target, a man in a suit sitting calmly on a bench, and fires. The shot lands perfectly. Without hesitation, he shifts his aim to a woman in a blazer nearby and eliminates her just as cleanly. Chaos quickly erupts in the area, but Charlie remains cold and methodical. Another woman walking along the sidewalk becomes his next target, and she drops before anyone even realizes where the shots are coming from. As people begin sprinting in different directions, he calmly tracks them through the sight of his rifle. One runner moves alone, another runs alongside a small child. Charlie fires again, striking both targets with deadly precision. Police units arrive quickly after the shooting begins, scanning the surroundings and rapidly identifying the rooftop position where the sniper had been stationed. By the time they get there, however, the shooter has already vanished. Detective Emerson soon takes control of the investigation. Moving carefully around the scene, he studies every detail and calmly reconstructs the path the shooter must have taken, from the firing position to the escape route. During the search, he recovers spent shell casings scattered across the rooftop, which are immediately collected and sealed as evidence. Forensic technicians examine a coin pulled from the parking meter Charlie used earlier. When they run it for prints, they uncover a clear thumbprint belonging to a man named James Barr. Acting quickly on the lead, Emerson organizes a team and heads straight for Barr's house. Inside, they find the suspect unconscious on the floor, apparently knocked out after consuming a large number of pills. With the evidence already pointing heavily toward him, the officers take Barr into custody. A quick inspection of the property only strengthens their suspicions. Parked in his garage is the same vehicle captured on surveillance cameras leaving the shooting location. They also discover tools and materials used to manufacture ammunition. Back at the police station, an officer sits across the interrogation table from Barr, who remains handcuffed and eerily silent. His stare is intense, fixed straight through the officer, as if he barely notices the room around him. The officer tries reasoning with him, suggesting that cooperating could make things easier, especially for Barr himself. They slide a notepad across the table, expecting him to waive his right to an attorney and write out a confession. Instead, Barr slowly writes a single name on the page, Jack Reacher. Then he tells them to find him. The officer immediately brings the unusual request to the district attorney. Both men are surprised by what they uncover when they start researching the name. Jack Reacher appears to have served for years in the military, yet his records are strangely incomplete. What little information exists mentions commendations, medals, and missions so obscure that even senior officers have no knowledge of them. The two men quickly realize that locating someone like him would be nearly impossible, unless he decided to appear on his own. Almost as if summoned, the man himself walks through the door. Reacher wastes no time getting to the point. He agrees to explain what he knows, but only if he's allowed to see the suspect first. By now, Barr has been brutally beaten during transport to the holding facility and lies in a hospital bed, unconscious and in a coma. Standing beside the bed, Reacher studies the injured man silently before asking to review the evidence collected so far. The authorities refuse his request. Without another word, Reacher heads for the door, ready to leave. Officers step in front of him, blocking the exit, not in a way he appreciates. They try convincing him to stay, suggesting it wouldn't be right to abandon someone who asked for his help. Reacher immediately corrects them. Barr is not his friend. At that moment, Helen Roden enters the room. Calm but assertive, she confronts Emerson and the district attorney for questioning her client without her presence. Her tone changes slightly when she notices Reacher standing there. She clearly hadn't expected the authorities to track him down so quickly. Reacher offers no reaction, maintaining a blank expression until the officers leave the room. As Helen and Reacher step out as well, he remarks on the unusual position she's in, defending a suspect while opposing her own father, the district attorney. She attempts to suggest that Reacher must have some personal loyalty to Barr, but he shuts that idea down immediately. The only reason he's here, he says, is to make sure Barr is buried. Later, the two continue their conversation at a restaurant. Reacher begins by asking why she would challenge her father's office to defend someone she barely knows, especially someone he believes is unquestionably guilty. Helen explains that it's simply her duty as a defense attorney. Beyond that, she feels that certain convictions have come far too easily and someone needs to challenge them. Reacher remains unconvinced and states plainly that Barr is responsible. He then recounts Barr's history from their time in the military. Barr had trained obsessively as a sniper, developing remarkable accuracy. Yet when he was first deployed to Iraq, he didn't fire a single live round for nearly 2 years. Eventually, the restraint broke. One day he snapped, taking down 4 men with 4 perfectly placed shots. Helen asks why that didn't lead to prison. Reacher explains that the victims were part of a group known for brutal assaults against local women. Once the full story surfaced, military command quietly buried the incident rather than pursue charges. Even with that background, Helen insists Barr still deserves a proper trial and vows to defend him regardless of her father's reputation for winning cases. She offers Reacher a position as her lead investigator, hoping his knowledge could help uncover the truth. At first, he refuses and walks away just as she pulls away in her car, but when she suddenly slams on the brakes, stopping only inches from him, he changes his mind. He agrees to help, but only if she investigates the victims as thoroughly as she investigates Barr. Reacher immediately begins examining the collected evidence, studying crime scene photos, and reports with sharp attention to detail. Meanwhile, Helen starts her own investigation. She visits the home of one of the victims, where the victim's father reluctantly lets her inside after hearing who she is. At first, the man speaks quietly about his daughter, sharing memories of her life. But the atmosphere quickly grows tense as he begins questioning Helen instead, clearly angry that she's representing someone accused of killing his child. When Helen grows uncomfortable and tries to leave, the man suddenly orders her to stay seated. She refuses and rushes for the door, escaping the house and hurrying to her car, only to find her father already waiting outside. The district attorney has heard everything. Her father already knows everything about the meetings she's been having with the victims' families, and even worse in his mind, her decision to involve Jack Reacher. He warns her that she should walk away from the case while she still has the chance. This isn't simply a difficult legal battle, he says. The entire system is lined up against the man she's trying to defend. In his view, the odds are impossible. He also accuses her of having a personal motive, suggesting that she's only pursuing the case to push back against him. Helen refuses to accept that accusation and stands firm. Meanwhile, Reacher has just completed a walkthrough of a storage area in the police station where weapons are kept. As he prepares to leave, he casually mentions something that caught his attention earlier: why the shooter bothered paying the parking meter before carrying out the attack. Emerson doesn't think much of the comment and brushes it aside, but the other officer present pauses on the idea. To him, small details like that usually point towards something important. Before they part ways, Emerson tosses out a small challenge to see how sharp Reacher's memory really is, testing him with a quick observation from earlier in the day. Later that evening, Reacher finds himself at a nightclub. Loud music pulses through the room while Emerson, seated nearby, is lost in his own thoughts. A young woman named Sandy approaches Reacher's table, attempting to strike up a conversation with the quiet stranger. His dry, expressionless humor completely throws her off balance. Feeling insulted, she slams her hand on the table and storms away, clearly irritated. Her reaction quickly attracts the attention of several men she calls her brothers, 5 aggressive young guys eager to confront the man who offended her. Reacher has no interest in escalating things. He calmly warns the one leading them, Jeb, that this is a bad idea and that they should simply walk away before things turn ugly. Jeb ignores the warning. Reacher eventually agrees to step outside with them, but delivers one last caution, explaining that fights like this rarely end well for people who start them. Jeb charges at him first. Within seconds he's dropped, first by a punch, then an elbow, followed by a brutal kick that leaves him collapsed on the ground. The remaining men hesitate for a moment but still decide to rush him. The outcome is quick and decisive. In less than 2 minutes, every one of them is on the ground. Sirens begin echoing in the distance. Hearing them, Sandy and the 2 remaining brothers who are still standing panic and run off, leaving the others groaning on the pavement. Before the police arrive, Reacher kneels beside Jeb, demanding to know who hired them to start the fight. The young man refuses to talk. Reacher is taken into custody shortly afterward. Inside the holding cell, Emerson and Helen arrive to see him. They inform him that one of the men from the fight may never fully recover the use of his legs. Reacher barely reacts to the news. Instead, he calmly explains that the entire incident was a setup. From the fake name he gave Sandy to the sudden shift in her attitude, the brothers appearing at just the right moment, and the police arriving so quickly, it all points to someone pulling the strings behind the scenes. Emerson steps outside while Reacher goes over the details with Helen. Not long after, he's released from custody. As they leave, Helen tells him that a plainclothes officer might be following him for protection, especially since he reported being watched earlier. Reacher dismisses the idea almost immediately, clearly skeptical, though he doesn't bother arguing further. During the drive, Helen shares what she has learned about the victims. One of them worked as a nanny and had been saving money for a long-awaited vacation. She had postponed the trip so she could continue caring for a child she loved deeply, only to lose her life that day. Another victim worked cleaning houses and was a single mother who had devoted everything to raising her son well. Her effort had paid off. He was excelling in school, but she was killed while trying to buy baseball tickets for him. A third victim was a widow who had been heading to the bank to secure a loan that might save her late husband's failing construction company. It wasn't a business she even liked, but she felt responsible for keeping it alive. Another woman had just purchased an anniversary gift for her husband shortly before she was shot. The final victim was a man who had recently argued with his wife, but had come prepared to make peace. He was carrying flowers when the bullet struck him. Later, back at the condo, Reacher offers a theory. The woman who bought the watch and the man carrying flowers might not have been strangers after all. In his view, they could have been secretly involved, meeting each other behind their spouses' backs. He asks Helen to obtain Barr's financial records and a list of places he frequently visited so he can continue digging into the case. Elsewhere that night, the man who has been tailing Reacher checks in with his employer. Charlie is clearly irritated. He scolds the man for relying on local thugs, getting one of them killed, and still failing to deal with a single former soldier. It's not that he doubts Reacher's toughness, it's the sloppy execution that bothers him. The entire operation, in his opinion, has been handled poorly. Then another man enters the room, Zek. Quiet and unsettling, his presence immediately shifts the atmosphere. The man who had been following Reacher lowers his eyes, too intimidated to even look at him. Zek speaks calmly, telling a story about surviving in Siberia, about brutal cold, starvation, and a time when he had to cut off his own thumb to stay alive. Now he says it's time for the other man to prove his loyalty in the same way. If he truly wants to show commitment, he should remove his own left thumb. The terrified man tries but can't bring himself to do it. Without hesitation, Charlie shoots him in the head. Meanwhile, Helen hands over Barr's financial documents while driving with Reacher in the passenger seat. As he studies them, he begins reconsidering the case. Maybe Barr wasn't acting alone. Perhaps the shooter had help, possibly someone he trained with in the past. Considering Barr's quiet life and those unexplained weekend trips, it wouldn't be surprising if another former ranger were involved. Reacher's next stop is the auto parts shop Sandy mentioned earlier. The man working at the front counter attempts to act tough, warning that he'll call the police if Reacher causes trouble. Reacher ignores him completely and walks straight into the back of the building. Inside the staff room, he finds Sandy. She looks nervous the moment she sees him. Quickly, she begins explaining herself, saying that Jeb told her Reacher was some kind of creep, which is why she had been happy to see him get beaten up. Reacher isn't interested in the explanation. He simply asks her for an address. She gives it to him. Then he asks for her car keys, technically Jeb's car. Without making a big deal about it, he takes them and leaves. Before leaving the shop, Reacher gives Sandy one last piece of advice. She should disappear for a while. He hints that the situation around the case is about to get messy, and she definitely doesn't want to be around when things spiral out of control. Not long afterward, he pulls up outside Jeb's house. The same mysterious car that has been shadowing him all day continues to follow at a distance. Sitting near the entrance to the building is an elderly woman slumped in a chair, staring ahead with a vacant expression, as if she's completely disconnected from what's happening around her. Reacher asks her a few simple questions, trying to see if she'll respond, but she barely moves. When he notices a pipe resting beside her, he assumes she's high on something and heads inside without giving it much more thought. The moment he steps through the door, the woman behind him quietly pulls out a phone and dials a number. Apparently she wasn't nearly as out of it as she pretended to be. Inside the building, two men suddenly jump him. Their attack is clumsy and poorly coordinated, and they keep bumping into each other as they try to land hits. In the confusion, one of them accidentally knocks out the other, leaving himself wide open. Reacher immediately takes advantage of the mistake, grabbing the man and nearly gouging out his eye. The first attacker recovers and rushes back into the fight, but things only get worse when Reacher slams the guy's bald head directly into his partner's face. Just when it seems the fight is over, a third man appears behind him with a gun drawn. Reacher reacts instantly, spinning around, knocking the weapon away, and twisting the man's arm until it breaks. Once the threat is neutralized, he demands information about Jeb. The man caves quickly, admitting that something strange is going on and revealing Jeb's last known location. Reacher takes the man's car and drives off, once again noticing the same quiet vehicle trailing him from a distance. When he returns to Helen, he tells her that Jeb may already be dead, and not from the beating he received earlier. Reacher then lays out the growing doubts that have been forming in his mind. The way the shooting was carried out simply doesn't match Barr's usual methods. The sniper's position doesn't make sense. Barr always places the sun behind him during a shot like that, yet this time the setup was completely different. Reacher also points out that Barr might not be the greatest marksman in the world, but he's experienced enough not to leave evidence behind so carelessly. Everything about the case feels staged: his habits, the ammunition, even the coin with his fingerprint on it. It's all too perfect, almost like someone deliberately arranged the evidence to frame him. In Reacher's mind, Barr called for him because he knew Reacher wouldn't ignore something that didn't add up. But Helen is exhausted with the speculation. She reminds him that her reason for taking the case was never to prove Barr innocent, only to make sure he receives a fair trial. From her perspective, the evidence still points directly at the suspect. At the moment, it seems like her father may have been right all along, and Reacher is simply chasing theories that aren't there. She sees a man who might be too attached to his past to look at the situation clearly. Reacher responds calmly, presenting just enough logic to make her hesitate. Then he points to the vehicle that has been following him throughout the day and asks her to run the license plate. Word about the plate travels quickly. Zek hears about it almost immediately, while Charlie wastes no time warning the driver that his cover has been blown. Later, back at the office, Reacher scribbles something on a small scrap of paper and slides it across the desk to Helen. Before she can even read it, her phone rings. She answers the call, writes down a few notes, and suddenly everything begins to connect. Between the message on the paper, the information from the call, and the license plate leading back to a company called Lebendauer Enterprises, the picture becomes clearer. The woman who had been heading to the bank for a loan was likely the real target of the attack. The other victims were simply collateral damage, meant to disguise the true motive. The discovery leaves Helen feeling like the case has suddenly grown far bigger than she expected. Even though part of her now believes Reacher might be onto something, she still hesitates to go deeper. Reacher wants her to push further and uncover whoever ordered the killing, but she isn't ready to take that risk. For now, she'd rather focus on defending the man already in custody than chase a hidden conspiracy. Meanwhile, Sandy is getting ready for a night out when Charlie approaches her on the street. He acts friendly and introduces himself as someone who knew Jeb. Trying to keep things casual, he suggests grabbing a drink together. Sandy politely declines, explaining that she's on her way somewhere else. Before she can walk away, another one of Charlie's men suddenly steps in and punches her hard, dropping her instantly. As she lies unconscious on the ground, Charlie kneels beside her, covering her nose and mouth with his hand. He holds it there until she stops breathing. That same night, Helen makes a decision. She's staying on the case. She arrives to meet Reacher with fresh information. She has located a shooting range that could match the level of precision they've been analyzing. She also plans to review legal files connected to the widow who had been heading to the bank, hoping to discover whether anyone held a grudge against her or her late husband, someone who might have wanted her dead. Reacher shuts that idea down immediately. If their theory is correct, the people behind the shooting won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who starts digging too close to the truth. That includes her. Elsewhere, Emerson begins processing the scene of Sandy's murder. As he studies the evidence, he starts looking for someone capable of killing with a single punch. Reacher, aware that he's still under surveillance, drives to Sandy's apartment building. From inside his car, he sees paramedics wheeling her body out on a stretcher. Emerson spots him parked nearby, and anger flashes across the detective's face. Reacher notices the reaction instantly and quietly prepares himself in case the situation turns dangerous. Emerson orders him to step out of the vehicle. Instead, Reacher throws the car into reverse and speeds away. That's enough for the detective to declare him a suspect, triggering a full-scale police pursuit. Reacher weaves through traffic, slipping past patrol cars racing toward him. At the same time, he spots Charlie's vehicle trying to escape the area to avoid exposing their operation. Reacher begins chasing them as well, ramming their car repeatedly in an attempt to force them off the road. The criminals fight to keep control of the vehicle, while police units close in behind Reacher. At one point his car stalls for a moment, but then roars back to life, sending the chase tearing through the city streets once again. Even though the suspects manage to shake him for a moment, Reacher refuses to give up the chase. He spots a narrow alley they might have turned into and drives in carefully, scanning every corner. Sure enough, he catches sight of them again. The pursuit bursts back onto the main road, engines roaring through the night. This time, a police helicopter joins the hunt, sweeping the streets with a bright searchlight. At a busy intersection, police cars try to trap him in a tight box. Reacher reacts quickly, slipping through the smallest opening and keeping Charlie's vehicle in sight. One by one, the other cars disappear from view as the chase continues. Eventually, Reacher pulls off an unexpected move. He opens the door of his still rolling car, steps out, and blends into a group of passengers waiting at a nearby bus stop. One of the people in the crowd casually hands him a baseball cap, giving him a quick disguise. Moments later, officers swarm the abandoned vehicle, only to discover it's empty. Meanwhile, the bus quietly pulls away from the stop, with Reacher sitting among the passengers. Not long after, Emerson and the district attorney arrive at Helen's apartment. They press her with questions about Reacher, who he really is and where he might be now. Helen insists she has no idea, but when their questioning begins to sound like they're treating her as an accomplice, she finally loses patience. Most of her frustration is directed at her father, who reminds her that he warned her to stay far away from someone like Reacher. While the discussion continues, Helen steps away to take a phone call. It's Reacher. Speaking calmly, he explains that someone is trying to frame him in order to make him disappear. Despite that, he tells her he has no intention of running. He plans to stay and fight it out. Before hanging up, he warns her to be cautious, especially around the men currently inside her apartment. In particular, she should be wary of the one pretending to care about her safety, while encouraging her to keep her distance from Reacher. As his words sink in, things begin to feel different. When Emerson and the district attorney approach her again and ask who she was speaking with, she simply tells them it's time for them to leave. Meanwhile, Reacher heads to the shooting range Helen mentioned earlier. The owner, Martin, greets him warmly at first, but the moment Barr's name comes up, the mood changes noticeably. Reacher keeps pressing for answers, even after admitting that he isn't a police officer. Eventually, Martin agrees to talk, but only if Reacher completes a challenge first. From a long distance, Reacher must fire 3 shots and hit the bulls all 3 times. Reacher accepts without hesitation. As he lines up the rifle, memories of Barr's time in Iraq cross his mind. One by one, he fires the shots. None of them land perfectly in the center, but the grouping is tight and consistent, good enough to impress Martin. Satisfied, the range owner agrees to answer a single question. Reacher asks who the best shooter the range has ever seen was. Martin replies immediately, James Barr. To prove it, he even brings out old paper targets from Barr's practice sessions. But Reacher studies them closely and shakes his head. The shots are too perfect. Barr, he knows, simply isn't capable of that level of precision. Reacher proposes a different explanation. Someone else, someone far more skilled, must have fired those shots and allowed Barr to take the credit. Martin struggles to understand why anyone would give up recognition for such impressive shooting. Reacher points out that if the real marksman had a specific motive, staying in the background would make sense. They pull up the range's records and begin reviewing the visitor logs. Eventually, they notice a name that appears regularly alongside Barr's, Charlie. Realizing the importance of the discovery, Reacher gathers the paper targets as evidence and quickly calls Helen to share what he's learned. He warns her not to trust anyone with the information, but Helen can't talk at that moment. She's sitting across from her father, discussing the deeper issues surrounding Lebendauer Enterprises. She's increasingly disturbed by how many accusations have surfaced against the company and how authorities continue to ignore them. Her father suggests that most of those complaints likely came from bitter business rivals, which is why they were never taken seriously. Helen disagrees strongly. In her view, law enforcement is either too closely connected to Lebendauer or too afraid to challenge him, knowing what tends to happen to people who get in his way. Suddenly, a realization hits her. By digging into those records under her own name, she may have exposed herself. She appeals to her father not as a lawyer, but as his daughter, asking him to put her safety first. He agrees to protect her, but not under the conditions she wants. He reaches for the phone, intending to place her into protective custody. Helen immediately refuses and storms out of the office. On her way down the hallway, she passes a janitor vacuuming the floor. A few steps later, the sound of the machine stops. When she glances back, the man is gone. The moment feels strange, but she keeps moving toward the elevator. Emerson steps inside the elevator with her. The silence between them is heavy. Helen already has the uneasy feeling that something is wrong, and she's right. Before she can even press a button, Emerson suddenly grabs her and shocks her with a taser. She collapses instantly. When the elevator doors slide open again, 2 men are waiting outside. They drag her away. At the same time, Reacher tries calling Helen again, but it isn't Helen who answers, it's Charlie. Helen is tied up somewhere inside a construction site. Charlie makes the situation clear. Reacher has 1 hour to come meet them, or she'll suffer the consequences. Reacher doesn't react the way they expect. Instead, he calmly points out that he could send everything he found at the shooting range straight to federal investigators. Before ending the call, he tells Charlie they can do whatever they want to Helen. The response rattles Charlie's partner and terrifies Helen. A moment later, the phone rings again. This time, Reacher calls back with a single message. He's going to kill Charlie. Charlie tries to brush it off, but the call ends abruptly. Then the phone rings again for a third time. Reacher lays it out clearly. He has nothing left to lose, and if pushed too far, the things he's willing to do won't be pleasant. He agrees to meet, but there's a condition. If he calls again and Helen doesn't answer the phone herself, he'll disappear completely, and if that happens, they'll never see him coming. Eventually, Reacher arrives at the construction site. He isn't alone. Martin has come along as well, after Reacher asked him for help obtaining weapons. But instead of bringing a gun, the older man hands him a knife, explaining that he can't provide firearms. Even though Martin refuses to provide a firearm, he still offers his help. He can see that the former soldier hasn't handled a weapon in a while and might be a little rusty. As they move into position overlooking the construction site, the older man patiently walks Reacher through the basics again, giving him a quick refresher on the fundamentals of shooting. At the same time, Helen, still tied to a chair inside the site, tries to get answers from Zek. She questions his methods, wanting to understand what motivates someone like him. Zek doesn't offer any meaningful explanation. Instead, he focuses on intimidation, speaking in ways meant only to frighten her. Helen then turns to Emerson and demands to know why he involved himself in something like this. The detective answers bluntly, he didn't have a choice. Zek makes the situation clear. If Helen's father doesn't back off the case, things will only get worse for both of them. Right then, Helen's phone rings. It's Reacher. She answers, and his voice comes through calmly. He tells her to trust herself and to trust him. Everything, he promises, will be over soon. Moments later, Reacher drives into the yard, reversing the car toward the site. As Zek's men notice the vehicle arriving, Charlie climbs to a high vantage point and prepares to take the shot. He lines up the rifle, expecting Reacher to be sitting upright behind the wheel, but Reacher is lying flat across the seat. Charlie fires and misses. Gunmen on the ground immediately begin shooting at the car, but they can't hit their target either. From his own position, Martin, almost blind and relying more on sound than sight, fires a shot toward the noise of the gunfire. The unexpected shot forces Zek's men to duck for cover and creates a brief window for Reacher to move once the car rolls to a stop. With the vehicle now stuck, Reacher's plan is to reach the trailer on foot. But he needs Martin to keep the attackers occupied. As Reacher sprints from cover to cover, Martin manages to shoot one of Zek's men in the arm. The larger enforcer fires back wildly, trying to hit both Martin and Reacher at the same time. But Reacher suddenly appears beside him, smashing the man's head against a heavy stone, twice, before finishing off the injured one. Charlie quickly identifies Martin's position and fires toward him. With bullets now flying from several directions and his rifle starting to malfunction, Charlie abandons the position and disappears into hiding. That moment of confusion gives Reacher enough time to reach the camper, only to discover that it's empty. Reacher signals Martin with the next part of the plan: drive a dump truck toward the side of the site where Helen is being held. The noise and movement will create a distraction. While the truck rumbles forward, drawing attention, Reacher slips through the shadows and quietly eliminates two more of Zek's men. Rain begins to fall as Charlie searches for him in the darkness, but the hunter soon becomes the hunted. Reacher suddenly appears behind him and orders him to drop the weapon. Charlie tosses his rifle aside, and Reacher does the same. The two men square off, settling things with their hands. Reacher charges forward, slamming Charlie against a thick steel structure before landing several heavy punches. Charlie fights back and manages to land a few hits of his own. For a moment, the fight hangs in the balance. Then Reacher regains control. He delivers a crushing blow to Charlie's leg, making him cry out in pain. Another strike sends him crashing to the ground. Desperate, Charlie pulls a knife from a sheath strapped to his ankle. But Reacher overwhelms him again, knocking him down and driving a knee hard into his face. As Charlie tries to crawl away, Reacher grabs his hand and twists it brutally. The scream echoes across the site, making Emerson tense up from the place where he's hiding. Reacher finally ends the fight with a brutal stomp that knocks Charlie unconscious. He then heads toward the camper where Emerson is holding Helen hostage. The corrupt officer hides behind her, using her body as a shield, but Reacher calls him out immediately, saying he has known for some time that Emerson was involved. Despite the hostage in front of him, Reacher fires and kills Emerson. Behind them, Zek sits quietly, watching everything unfold. Helen quickly speaks up, clearing something up first. Her father, she insists, had nothing to do with any of this, but Zek doesn't seem particularly interested in that detail. Reacher and Helen approach the old man. After a long silence, Zek finally speaks, claiming that the name he gave earlier is the only one he remembers. Helen grabs her phone and calls the police while Reacher tells the aging killer what awaits him now: prison. Zek shakes his head, unconvinced. According to him, Reacher will end up the one behind bars for murder, while he himself will simply appear to be an old man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Reacher considers the possibility and then shoots Zek in the head. Helen is stunned. She asks how killing him helps prove Barr's innocence, or even helps Reacher himself. Reacher calmly replies that justice has already been delivered. From Helen's perspective, that kind of justice won't hold up in court, but Reacher seems confident that she'll handle the legal side of things. With police sirens already approaching and Martin urging them to leave before backup arrives, the two slip away from the site. Later, Helen visits Barr in the clinic. He has regained consciousness, though he still appears confused and foggy about everything that has happened. Tears in his eyes, Barr tells her he won't fight whatever punishment comes next, even though he insists he didn't commit the crime. To him, this is simply karma for the things he did in the past. Helen shows him the crime scene photos and asks him to explain how he would have carried out the shooting if he had been responsible. As Barr describes the process step by step, it ends up confirming the theory Reacher had all along. Her father listens quietly as Barr explains everything. Helen promises Barr that she will get him out of this nightmare. But Barr isn't convinced. He knows that even if he's cleared, he'll never truly be free, because there's one man who promised to appear the moment Barr ever steps out of line again, and that man is Jack Reacher. Analysis: imagine a crime so brutal, so calculated, that the police solve it almost instantly. 5 innocent people are shot in broad daylight. A sniper fires from a parking garage, disappears without a trace, and leaves behind just enough evidence for investigators to close the case within hours. The suspect is quickly arrested. The weapon is found, fingerprints match. The case looks airtight, but when the accused man is interrogated, he doesn't defend himself. He doesn't confess. Instead, he writes just 5 words on a piece of paper: "Get Jack Reacher." And that's when everything changes, because Jack Reacher isn't a lawyer, he isn't a detective, he isn't even part of the system. He's a former military investigator who lives completely off the grid, a drifter who moves from city to city with no phone, no address, and no interest in staying anywhere for long. But when something smells wrong, when the truth is buried under layers of lies, Reacher has a habit of showing up. And when he does, people start getting nervous. Released in 2012, Jack Reacher is not just another action movie. It's a slow-burning crime thriller built around a mystery that looks simple on the surface, but becomes more dangerous the deeper you dig. Because sometimes the real story isn't about who pulled the trigger. It's about who wanted the crime to happen in the first place. In this video, we're going to break down the entire movie, the story, the hidden details, the ending, and the deeper themes that make Jack Reacher such a fascinating thriller. So let's start at the beginning, with a crime that seemed solved before the investigation even began. Before we dive deeper into the mystery, let's first understand what kind of movie Jack Reacher really is. Released in 2012, this film was directed by Christopher McQuarrie and adapted from the best-selling novel One Shot by author Lee Child, whose Jack Reacher book series has millions of fans around the world. At first glance, the movie looks like a typical action film, but once the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Jack Reacher is something a little different. The film blends several genres together: crime, mystery, thriller, and action. Instead of relying only on explosions and fights, the story is built around investigation, tension, and slowly uncovering the truth. The movie takes place in a modern American city where an ordinary day suddenly turns into a nightmare. A sniper carefully positions himself inside a parking garage overlooking a busy public area. From that vantage point, he opens fire on unsuspecting civilians below. Within minutes, 5 people are dead. The city is shaken. Panic spreads quickly, and the police launch a massive investigation to track down whoever committed the attack. But surprisingly, the case doesn't take long to solve. Detectives follow a trail of evidence that leads directly to a man named James Barr, a former military sniper with a troubled past. Everything points toward him: the rifle used in the attack, fingerprints at the scene, and a history that already raised questions about his character. From the outside, it seems like the police have caught the killer almost immediately. But when Barr is finally brought in for questioning, he refuses to speak. Instead, he writes down a single request: "Get Jack Reacher." That moment becomes the turning point of the entire story. Because Jack Reacher is not someone the police call for help. He's someone people call when the truth might be hiding behind the official story. And once Reacher arrives, the case that looked perfectly solved begins to fall apart piece by piece. At first glance, Jack Reacher might look like a straightforward action movie, a mysterious hero, a violent crime, a conspiracy waiting to be uncovered, but the film is actually built on something deeper than just action. At its core, Jack Reacher is a crime investigation thriller, a story that slowly peels back layers of deception until the real truth finally emerges. Instead of rushing from one fight scene to another, the movie spends time building tension through investigation. Every clue matters, every conversation carries weight, and every small detail could change the entire direction of the case. This is what makes the film feel different from many modern action movies. The story moves like a detective puzzle, where the audience follows along as pieces begin to connect. But beneath the mystery, the film explores several powerful themes. One of the biggest themes is justice versus the legal system. The movie constantly raises an uncomfortable question. What happens when the system believes it has the right answer, but the truth is something completely different? Sometimes evidence can be manipulated. Sometimes people in power control the narrative, and sometimes the wrong person is blamed simply because the story fits too perfectly. That's where Jack Reacher comes in. Reacher represents the classic lone wolf hero, someone who doesn't belong to any institution and doesn't answer to any authority. He doesn't wear a badge, he doesn't follow political pressure, and he certainly doesn't care about public opinion. What he cares about is the truth. This independence makes him both dangerous and effective. Without rules tying him down, he can go wherever the evidence leads, even if that path puts powerful people at risk. The emotional tone of the film reflects this tension. The atmosphere is serious, grounded, and often suspenseful. Instead of flashy spectacle, the movie relies on quiet moments of discovery, where the mystery slowly tightens around everyone involved. Because of this balance between investigation and action, the film appeals to viewers who enjoy intelligent thrillers, stories where the excitement comes not just from what happens, but from understanding why it happens. And as the mystery deepens, one thing becomes clear. This case is not as simple as it first appeared. The story of Jack Reacher begins with a moment that immediately grabs your attention. Early one morning, a man drives into a parking garage overlooking a busy riverfront area. From the top floor, he calmly assembles a rifle and begins observing the people below. Families walking, office workers heading to their jobs, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Then suddenly, the shooting begins. One by one, 5 innocent civilians are killed in a precise and calculated sniper attack. The gunman disappears before anyone can react, leaving behind nothing but chaos and panic. The city is immediately thrown into shock, and the police begin a massive investigation. But surprisingly, the case doesn't take long to crack. Detectives follow a trail of evidence that leads them to James Barr, a former U.S. Army sniper. The clues seem overwhelming. His fingerprints appear at the scene, the weapon can be traced back to him, and his military background makes the crime seem believable. Barr is quickly arrested. For the police, the case appears closed almost as soon as it begins. But during interrogation, something strange happens. Barr refuses to speak. He doesn't argue. He doesn't confess. He simply writes 5 words on a notepad: "Get Jack Reacher." That message sets everything in motion. Jack Reacher, a former military investigator who once handled Barr's case during their time in the Army, soon arrives in the city. Interestingly, Reacher doesn't come to defend Barr. In fact, at first, he believes Barr might actually be guilty. But once Reacher begins examining the evidence himself, things start to feel wrong. Certain details about the crime scene don't add up. Witness statements seem slightly inconsistent. Some of the evidence feels almost too perfectly arranged. With the help of Helen Roden, the defense attorney assigned to Barr's case, Reacher starts digging deeper into what really happened. And the deeper he goes, the more dangerous the investigation becomes. What originally looked like a simple case of mass murder slowly transforms into something far more complicated, a carefully orchestrated conspiracy involving professional criminals and a mysterious figure known only as the Zek. As Reacher gets closer to uncovering the truth, powerful people begin to realize that he's not someone they can easily silence, and the investigation quickly turns into a deadly game where the wrong move could cost someone their life. As the story of Jack Reacher moves toward its final act, the mystery that once seemed simple finally begins to reveal its true shape. What initially looked like a random sniper attack was never random at all. Through his investigation, Reacher slowly uncovers the truth behind the entire setup. The man accused of the crime, James Barr, was not chosen by accident. In fact, he was the perfect person to frame. Years earlier, during his time in the military, Barr had been involved in a controversial incident where civilians were killed. Even though the case was complicated, his reputation had already been damaged. To the public, he already looked capable of something like this, so the real criminals used that reputation to their advantage. The sniper attack was carefully staged. The evidence was planted in a way that would lead investigators directly to Barr, ensuring the police would close the case quickly without digging any deeper. But behind the scenes, the real operation was controlled by a powerful criminal mastermind known only as the Zek. The Zek runs a network of organized crime, operating in the shadows while using others to carry out his plans. The entire attack was part of a larger strategy designed to protect his criminal enterprise while distracting law enforcement with a false suspect. Unfortunately for him, there was one variable he didn't anticipate: Jack Reacher. Unlike the police, Reacher doesn't accept evidence at face value. He reconstructs events step by step, looking for the smallest inconsistencies that reveal the truth. And once he understands the full picture, he moves directly toward the people responsible. The final confrontation brings Reacher face to face with the criminals behind the conspiracy, exposing the manipulation that nearly allowed the real perpetrators to escape justice. But the ending also raises a deeper question. Even when the truth is uncovered, the legal system doesn't always guarantee that justice will follow. Sometimes the system is slow, sometimes it's manipulated, and sometimes it fails. Reacher understands this better than anyone. That's why his version of justice doesn't always wait for permission. By the end of the film, the conspiracy is exposed and the real villains are confronted, but Reacher himself disappears once again, leaving the city the same way he arrived. Quietly, no fame, no recognition, just another mystery solved by a man who exists outside the system. And somewhere out there, Jack Reacher is already moving on to the next place where the truth might be hiding. One of the most interesting things about Jack Reacher is that the movie doesn't just tell its story through dialogue and action. It hides important clues in small details, the kind of details that many viewers might miss the first time they watch the film. Because while the story appears straightforward on the surface, the movie is quietly dropping hints about the truth long before the mystery is fully revealed. Take the crime scene investigation, for example. When Reacher begins examining the evidence connected to the sniper attack, he immediately notices that certain elements feel too perfect. The rifle placement, the shell casings, the positioning of the shots. Everything seems arranged in a way that makes the case easy for investigators to solve. And that's exactly the problem. Real crimes are messy. They rarely leave behind such neat, convenient trails of evidence. But this crime scene almost feels like it was designed to tell a specific story. And that small observation becomes the first major crack in the official narrative. Another subtle detail appears in the way Jack Reacher himself is portrayed throughout the film. The movie often places him alone in wide camera shots, standing in empty streets, quiet rooms, or large spaces where everyone else seems small or distant. This visual choice reinforces an important idea about his character. Reacher is an outsider. He doesn't belong to any city. He doesn't belong to any institution. And he certainly doesn't belong to the legal system he's investigating. He moves through the world like a ghost, appearing when needed, solving problems, and then disappearing again. There are also small moments of foreshadowing scattered throughout the story. Certain conversations hint that powerful people may be controlling events behind the scenes. Some characters behave nervously around Reacher, as if they know more about the situation than they're willing to admit. These subtle clues prepare the audience for the larger conspiracy that eventually unfolds. And then there's the growing legend of Jack Reacher himself. Throughout the film, different characters react to his name with curiosity, respect, or even fear. Some people know exactly who he is, others have only heard rumors. But almost everyone understands one thing: if Jack Reacher is involved, something serious is about to be uncovered. These hidden details are part of what makes the movie rewarding to watch more than once. Because once you know the truth behind the story, you begin to notice how carefully the film planted clues from the very beginning, quietly guiding the audience toward a mystery that was never as simple as it first appeared. Now that we've explored the story and the hidden details inside the movie, let's step behind the camera and look at some fascinating facts and behind-the-scenes secrets about Jack Reacher. Because the journey of this film actually started long before the cameras ever began rolling. The movie is based on the best-selling novel, One Shot, from the hugely popular Jack Reacher book series written by Lee Child. By the time the film was made, the character had already become a global phenomenon in the world of thriller novels. Millions of readers were familiar with Reacher, a towering, physically imposing former military investigator who travels across America solving problems and exposing corruption. And that's where one of the biggest debates around the movie began. When Tom Cruise was cast as Jack Reacher, many fans of the books were surprised. In the novels, Reacher is described as extremely tall and intimidating, around 6 feet 5 inches, with a massive physical presence. Cruise, on the other hand, is much shorter than the character described in the books. This casting decision sparked a lot of discussion among fans before the movie even released. However, director Christopher McQuarrie focused less on physical size and more on capturing Reacher's personality, his intelligence, calm confidence, and analytical mind. And to prepare for the role, Tom Cruise trained extensively to portray the character's precise and efficient fighting style, which is very different from the exaggerated action choreography seen in many blockbuster movies. Another interesting fact is where the movie was filmed. Although the story takes place in a generic American city, much of the filming actually happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The city's architecture, bridges, and urban streets helped create the gritty atmosphere needed for a crime thriller. The production also tried to keep many of the action scenes grounded in realism. Instead of relying heavily on flashy special effects, the filmmakers focused on practical stunts and believable combat sequences, which helped the movie feel more intense and authentic. And perhaps the most interesting behind-the-scenes detail is the long creative partnership that grew out of this film. Director Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise would later collaborate again on several major action projects, building one of the most successful actor-director partnerships in modern Hollywood. So while Jack Reacher was just the beginning of this cinematic journey, it also helped shape a creative relationship that would influence many action films that followed. To really understand where Jack Reacher stands in the world of action and crime thrillers, it helps to compare it with other movies that explore similar ideas, because the concept of a lone hero uncovering a hidden conspiracy isn't new. In fact, it's one of the most popular formulas in modern thrillers. You might immediately think of movies like Taken, The Equalizer, or the Jason Bourne series. All of these films follow characters who operate outside the traditional system, highly skilled individuals who use their abilities to uncover the truth and deliver justice in ways that normal law enforcement often can't. But Jack Reacher approaches this formula in a slightly different way. While many action movies focus on fast pacing and constant combat, Jack Reacher spends much more time on investigation and deduction. Instead of rushing into action, Reacher studies the evidence. He analyzes crime scenes. He questions witnesses and reconstructs events piece by piece. In many ways, the movie feels closer to a detective story than a traditional action blockbuster. Another interesting comparison comes from the film's origins in Lee Child's best-selling novels. Fans of the books know that Jack Reacher was originally written as a physically massive character, someone whose presence alone could intimidate criminals. That's why the casting of Tom Cruise created such a big conversation among readers. Some fans felt the film version didn't match the physical description from the books, while others believed Cruise successfully captured the character's confidence, intelligence, and calm authority, which are equally important parts of Reacher's personality. The movie also stands apart from many modern thrillers because it doesn't rely heavily on huge explosions or global-scale threats. The stakes are personal and grounded. Instead of saving the world, Reacher is trying to uncover the truth behind a single crime, but that crime reveals a much larger conspiracy hidden beneath the surface. And that grounded approach is exactly what makes Jack Reacher feel different from many action movies released around the same time. It's less about spectacle and more about solving the puzzle. When Jack Reacher was released in 2012, the reaction to the film was surprisingly mixed. Some critics praised the movie for its grounded storytelling and its slow-burning approach to the mystery. They appreciated that the film focused on investigation and tension rather than non-stop explosions and spectacle. For those viewers, Jack Reacher felt like a refreshing throwback to older crime thrillers, the kind where the hero actually solves a puzzle instead of simply fighting his way through it. But not everyone saw it that way. Some critics felt the movie moved too slowly for an action film. Compared to the high-speed pacing audiences had come to expect from modern blockbusters, the methodical investigation in Jack Reacher felt quieter and more restrained. However, audience reactions told a slightly different story. Many viewers enjoyed the film's balance between mystery and action, and the character of Jack Reacher quickly became one of the movie's biggest highlights. His calm confidence, sharp intelligence, and no-nonsense approach to justice made him stand out from typical action heroes. Of course, there was still one topic that continued to dominate conversations about the movie: the casting of Tom Cruise as Jack Reacher. Fans of the original novels had long imagined Reacher as a towering, physically intimidating figure. Because of that, some readers initially struggled to accept Cruise in the role. But over time, many viewers began to separate the film version of the character from the book description, recognizing that Cruise brought a different kind of intensity to the role. Financially, the film performed well enough at the box office to prove that audiences were interested in the character and the world he inhabits. In fact, the movie's success eventually led to a sequel, and years later, an entirely new adaptation of the character in television form. And as often happens with many thrillers, Jack Reacher has slowly gained more appreciation over time. what once divided critics and fans has gradually become a movie that many viewers now consider an underrated entry in the crime thriller genre. So after everything, the investigation, the conspiracy, the action, and the mystery, the real question is Jack Reacher actually worth watching? The answer largely depends on what you expect from an action movie. If you're looking for nonstop explosions and constant fight scenes, this film might feel slower than typical modern blockbusters. But if you enjoy smart crime thrillers, where the story unfolds like a puzzle and every clue matters, then Jack Reacher offers something far more interesting. One of the movie's biggest strengths is its methodical storytelling. Instead of rushing through the plot, the film allows the mystery to develop step by step. Each new discovery pushes the story forward while slowly revealing a deeper conspiracy hiding beneath the surface. Another strong point is the character of Jack Reacher himself. He isn't the typical loud, reckless action hero. Reacher is calm, observant, and incredibly analytical. He studies situations carefully, often understanding what's happening long before everyone else does. That quiet confidence gives the character a unique presence that makes him stand out in the crime thriller genre. Of course, the movie isn't perfect. Some viewers may feel the pacing is slower than expected, especially during the investigation-heavy middle portion of the story. And the casting debate surrounding the lead role remained a major topic among fans of the original novels. But despite those criticisms, the film succeeds in delivering a tense, engaging mystery with just enough action to keep the story exciting. Ultimately, Jack Reacher, 2012, works best for viewers who appreciate intelligent thrillers, grounded action, and stories where the truth isn't always obvious at first. It's a film about uncovering hidden motives, challenging the official narrative, and proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the person holding the weapon, but the person who planned the entire crime from the shadows. And if you enjoy stories where a lone investigator takes on powerful forces to uncover the truth, then Jack Reacher is definitely a movie worth experiencing. REVIWS. When Jack Reacher arrived in theaters, it wasn't just another action movie trying to grab attention. It carried the weight of an enormously popular literary legacy. The film is based on the best-selling novels by British author Lee Child, a series that had already built a massive global following long before Hollywood ever touched the character. For readers of those books, Jack Reacher wasn't just a protagonist. He was an icon, a wandering ex-military investigator who drifts from town to town solving problems that ordinary law enforcement can't handle. So when the announcement came that the character would finally make his way to the big screen, expectations were naturally sky-high. Fans imagined a towering figure straight out of the pages of the novels. Intimidating, mysterious, and physically imposing. The books had spent years crafting a very specific image of who Jack Reacher was and how he operated. Translating that character into cinema meant more than simply adapting a story. It meant bringing an entire mythology to life. Hollywood ultimately chose to base the film primarily on one shot, one of the more well-known entries in Lee Child's series. On paper, it was an ideal starting point. The story already had the core ingredients of a strong thriller, a shocking opening crime, a tangled investigation, and a conspiracy slowly unfolding beneath the surface. It offered exactly the kind of tension-driven narrative that could work well in a cinematic format. But adapting a long-running literary series is never simple. Books allow space to build character history, internal thoughts, and a wider world around the protagonist. A film, on the other hand, has limited time. It must compress that complexity into a tight narrative that still introduces the character to audiences who may have never heard of him before. That challenge becomes especially clear with Jack Reacher himself. In the novels, he exists almost like a modern myth, a lone drifter who appears when trouble begins and disappears once the job is done. He carries with him a long, mysterious past that the books slowly reveal over time. In a single movie, however, much of that mythology inevitably gets reduced. The film has to focus on the immediate story rather than exploring the full depth of the character's history. As a result, the cinematic version of Jack Reacher presents only fragments of what readers know from the books. We see the essentials, a former military investigator with extraordinary skills and an instinct for uncovering hidden truths, but the deeper layers of the character remain largely implied rather than fully explored. This is a common trade-off when literature meets cinema. A novel can spend hundreds of pages developing a character. A movie has roughly 2 hours to establish who that character is, why they matter, and what drives them forward. Despite those limitations, the film attempts to capture the core spirit of Lee Child's creation, a quiet, analytical figure who operates outside traditional systems of authority. Reacher isn't a typical hero. He's a man who lives off the grid, moves without attachments, and inserts himself into dangerous situations only when he believes the truth needs uncovering. For audiences unfamiliar with the novels, the film essentially functions as an introduction, a first glimpse into the world of Jack Reacher. For longtime readers, however, the adaptation naturally invites comparison. How faithfully does the movie capture the character they've followed for years? Does it preserve the tone and atmosphere of the books? Or does it reshape the story to fit Hollywood's action thriller formula? Those questions hovered around the film from the moment it was announced, and they became part of the conversation surrounding its release. Because when a beloved literary character finally arrives on screen, the expectations aren't just about entertainment. They're about whether the adaptation can successfully translate a fictional legend into cinematic form. And that challenge, turning a long-running literary hero into a movie character, sits right at the heart of Jack Reacher. When Jack Reacher first arrived, the reaction surrounding the film was anything but simple. Even before audiences had the chance to see the movie, a storm of debate had already formed around it. Expectations were high, opinions were strong, and the conversation about the film quickly became just as interesting as the movie itself. Part of that reaction came from the massive popularity of the Jack Reacher novels. Lee Child's books had built a loyal fanbase over many years, and those readers had a very clear idea of who the character was supposed to be. For them, Reacher wasn't just another action hero. He was a carefully crafted literary figure with a specific personality, physical presence, and way of operating in the world. So when the film adaptation was announced, fans immediately began comparing the movie version to the one they had imagined for years. That comparison alone created a wave of controversy. Many readers approached the film with skepticism before it had even premiered, questioning whether the adaptation could truly capture the spirit of the books. At the same time, critics approached the movie from a slightly different perspective. Instead of measuring it strictly against the novels, many reviews focused on the film as a standalone action thriller. From that angle, the reception became far more balanced. Some critics praised the movie for its grounded style and traditional thriller structure, while others felt it followed familiar genre patterns without bringing anything particularly new to the table. The result was a reception that sat somewhere in the middle. It wasn't universally celebrated, but it also wasn't widely rejected. Instead, the film sparked a divided conversation where reactions often depended on what viewers were expecting going in. For audiences who were deeply attached to the books, the film often felt like a compromise, a version of the story that captured some elements of the character, but not all of them. Meanwhile, viewers who had never read the novels often judged the movie purely on its own merits as an action thriller, and many found it to be an entertaining ride. That contrast between expectations and experience played a huge role in shaping the film's reputation. Some viewers saw the movie as a faithful attempt to translate the spirit of the books into a cinematic format. Others felt it missed important aspects of what made the character compelling in the first place. But what makes the reception of Jack Reacher particularly interesting is that, despite the controversy and mixed reactions, the film still managed to find an audience. Over time, many viewers began to appreciate it as a solid, old-school thriller, a movie that relies on investigation, suspense, and character-driven tension rather than constant explosions and spectacle. In many ways, the film sits in an unusual place. It's a movie that sparked intense debate among fans, generated mixed critical responses, and yet still maintained a reputation as a competent and entertaining entry in the action thriller genre. And sometimes, that kind of reception says more about a film than universal praise ever could, because Jack Reacher wasn't just judged as a movie. It was judged as the cinematic arrival of a character that readers had been imagining for years. At the center of Jack Reacher is a character who feels almost larger than life. From the moment he appears on screen, it becomes clear that Reacher is not designed to be an ordinary protagonist. He's not the kind of hero who struggles to keep up with events around him. Instead, he walks into the story already several steps ahead of everyone else. Jack Reacher is introduced as a former military investigator who has completely disappeared from conventional society. He doesn't carry a phone, he doesn't maintain an address, he doesn't operate within any formal system. Instead, he drifts from place to place, appearing only when circumstances pull him into a problem that needs solving. And once he enters the picture, things start moving quickly. What makes Reacher fascinating, and sometimes controversial as a character, is just how capable he is. He reads situations almost instantly. He notices details other people overlook. Conversations rarely surprise him because he already seems to understand where they're going. It's as if every scene reveals another skill that he's already mastered. This extraordinary competence gives Reacher a unique presence in the story. He isn't simply reacting to events, he's dismantling them piece by piece. While the police struggle to make sense of the crime, Reacher begins connecting dots that no one else has even noticed yet. At times, his abilities almost feel superhuman. He can walk into a complicated situation, analyze the smallest clues, and arrive at conclusions with remarkable speed. To some viewers, this makes him incredibly compelling, a detective figure who operates with precision and confidence. But for others, it raises an interesting question. Can a character be too capable? Because Reacher rarely appears uncertain. He rarely makes mistakes, and when confrontation becomes unavoidable, he handles it with the same level of calm efficiency. Whether he's solving a puzzle, confronting criminals, or navigating a dangerous situation, the outcome often seems inevitable the moment he steps into the scene. This has led some viewers to compare him to what storytelling fans sometimes call a Mary Sue or perfect hero, a character whose abilities seem almost limitless. In those cases, the challenge of the story shifts. The suspense no longer comes from wondering if the hero will succeed, but from watching how effortlessly they will solve the problem. Yet this very quality is also part of what defines Jack Reacher as a character. He isn't meant to be an everyman caught in circumstances beyond his control. He's designed as a force, someone who arrives when things have gone terribly wrong and restores order in his own unconventional way. What makes him particularly intriguing is that he doesn't behave like a traditional hero. He doesn't chase recognition. He doesn't seek approval from authorities. In fact, he often operates completely outside of them. His loyalty isn't to institutions or systems, it's to his own personal sense of truth and justice. That independence is part of what gives the character his mystique. Reacher moves through the world like a ghost. He appears when the situation demands it, exposes the truth hiding beneath the surface, and once the problem is resolved, he simply moves on. No celebration, no reward, no lingering presence. Just another mystery solved by the stranger who showed up out of nowhere. Every great thriller needs a hook, a moment that immediately pulls the audience into the story. In Jack Reacher, that moment arrives within the very first minutes of the film. The movie opens with a chilling act of violence. A sniper calmly sets up position and begins targeting people from a distance. One by one, seemingly random victims fall. Within moments, 5 innocent people are dead. There's no warning, no chaos beforehand, just a cold, calculated attack carried out with terrifying precision. From the perspective of the authorities, the case appears straightforward. The investigation quickly leads to a suspect, James Barr, a former military sniper with a troubled past. Evidence stacks up rapidly. The rifle, the location, the background, everything seems to point directly to him. For the police and prosecutors, the case looks airtight, but then something unexpected happens. When Barr is interrogated, instead of offering a defense or explanation, he writes down just 5 words: "Get Jack Reacher." That single message changes everything, because Jack Reacher is not a lawyer. He's not a detective assigned to the case. In fact, no one even knows where he is. Reacher is a former military investigator who has completely disappeared from official records. He doesn't live anywhere permanently, doesn't leave a digital trail, and doesn't answer to any authority. Yet somehow, before anyone can even begin searching for him, Reacher shows up. And here's the twist. He doesn't come to defend Barr. In fact, when Reacher first learns about the case, he believes Barr is guilty. But Reacher also understands something the investigators may have missed. If Barr specifically asked for him, there must be a reason. And that reason suggests the story is far more complicated than it appears on the surface. What begins as a straightforward criminal case quickly evolves into something much deeper. As Reacher starts examining the details of the shooting, small inconsistencies begin to emerge, tiny clues that don't quite align with the official narrative. And once those pieces start falling into place, a much darker picture begins to appear. The killings were not random. The evidence may have been manipulated, and the man accused of the crime might not be the true mastermind behind it at all. What follows is not just a search for the shooter, it becomes a hunt for the truth. Reacher begins pulling at threads within the investigation, and each one reveals another layer of conspiracy hiding beneath the surface. Who actually orchestrated the attack? Why were those specific victims chosen? And perhaps most importantly, who benefits from framing a man like James Barr? As the mystery unfolds, the story shifts from a simple murder case into a much larger web of corruption, deception, and hidden motives. Every answer raises new questions, and every clue pushes Reacher deeper into a dangerous world where powerful people are determined to keep the truth buried. And that's what drives the core of Jack Reacher. Not just solving a crime, but exposing the carefully constructed lie behind it. Before Jack Reacher even introduces its main character, the film delivers one of its most powerful moments, an opening sequence that immediately sets the tone for everything that follows. There is almost no dialogue, no dramatic speeches, no exposition explaining what's about to happen. Instead, the film relies entirely on visuals. We watch as a man prepares a rifle. The movements are slow, careful, and methodical. He studies the area from a distance, calculating angles and positions. People move casually through a public space below, completely unaware that they are being observed. And then, without warning, the shooting begins. The attack unfolds with a disturbing calmness. There's no chaotic music pushing the scene forward. The camera simply observes as the sniper fires shot after shot, each one hitting its target with terrifying accuracy. 5 people die within moments. What makes this opening so effective is how controlled it feels. The scene isn't designed like a typical action sequence filled with explosions or frantic editing. Instead, it plays out almost clinically, which makes the violence even more unsettling. The tension comes from the silence, from the stillness of the camera, from the horrifying realization that this attack was planned with precision. It's a bold way to begin the film because it immediately pulls the audience into the mystery. The viewer isn't just watching an action movie start, they are witnessing the crime that will drive the entire story. And the impact of that opening lingers long after the scene ends. Once the shooting stops, the investigation begins. Police arrive, evidence is collected, and within a short time, the authorities believe they have found their suspect. The case appears to be closed almost as quickly as it began, but that opening scene plants a seed of doubt, because when a crime is executed with such cold precision, it raises a disturbing question. Was it really as simple as it looks? That question becomes the driving force behind the rest of the film. The opening sequence doesn't just introduce the plot, it establishes the atmosphere of the entire story. A world where violence can erupt suddenly, where appearances can be deceiving, and where the truth behind a crime may be far more complicated than anyone initially believes. By the time Jack Reacher himself finally enters the story, the tension has already been carefully built. The audience has seen the crime. They've felt the unease of that silent, calculated attack, and now they want answers. That's why this opening works so well. It doesn't rely on spectacle to grab attention. It uses suspense, the quiet, creeping kind that slowly tightens its grip on the viewer. From the very first scene, Jack Reacher makes one thing clear. This is not just an action movie. It's a mystery waiting to be unraveled. Once the shocking opening of Jack Reacher sets the story in motion, the film shifts into something that feels closer to an investigative puzzle than a typical action spectacle. Instead of rushing immediately from one explosive moment to the next, the narrative unfolds through a steady process of discovery. At first, the situation seems simple. A sniper attack has occurred, the evidence points to a suspect, and the authorities believe they have solved the case. From the outside, everything appears clean and logical, but when Jack Reacher begins examining the details, the story starts to change. The film structures its narrative around the gradual uncovering of information. Reacher approaches the case not as a man looking for quick answers, but as someone determined to understand every detail of what happened. He studies evidence, questions assumptions, and looks for inconsistencies that others might overlook. And slowly, those inconsistencies begin to surface. Small clues start appearing in unexpected places. A piece of evidence that doesn't quite add up, a timeline that feels slightly off, a detail in the crime scene that suggests the situation might not be as straightforward as it first appeared. Each discovery pushes the story forward, revealing another layer beneath the surface of the investigation. What makes this narrative approach interesting is how carefully the film reveals its information. Instead of delivering every answer at once, the plot develops through a sequence of revelations. As Reacher connects the dots, the audience is invited to follow the same trail of logic. The case that once seemed obvious begins to look increasingly complicated. Soon, the story expands beyond the initial crime. What looked like a random act of violence begins to resemble something far more deliberate. The deeper Reacher digs, the clearer it becomes that the sniper attack may have been part of a much larger plan. This gradual expansion of the mystery gives the film its momentum. Every time the investigation reaches a conclusion, another question emerges. The narrative keeps shifting, forcing both the characters and the audience to reconsider what they thought they understood. And as the pieces begin to fall into place, a conspiracy slowly takes shape. The truth behind the shooting isn't just about the man accused of pulling the trigger. It involves hidden connections, manipulated evidence, and people operating behind the scenes who are determined to keep their actions concealed. This layered structure turns Jack Reacher into more than a simple crime story. it becomes a process of unraveling a carefully constructed deception. By the time the investigation reaches its later stages, the stakes have grown far beyond the original crime. What started as a single case now exposes a network of motives and secrets that reach much deeper than anyone expected. And at the center of it all is Reacher, patiently pulling apart the story until the truth finally reveals itself. As Jack Reacher unfolds, one of the most noticeable aspects of the film is its pacing. On paper, the story itself is relatively straightforward: a sniper attack, a suspect in custody, and an investigation that slowly uncovers a deeper conspiracy. It's the kind of premise that could easily move at a sharp, relentless pace, but the film chooses a slower rhythm. At just over 2 hours long, Jack Reacher takes its time developing the investigation and the relationships between characters. The narrative often pauses to allow conversations, interrogations, and deductions to play out in detail. Instead of rushing from one action scene to another, the movie frequently leans into dialogue-driven moments where characters attempt to piece together what really happened. For some viewers, this deliberate pacing works. It allows the mystery to unfold gradually and gives the investigation a sense of methodical logic. Reacher studies clues, tests theories, and slowly dismantles the assumptions surrounding the case. The film tries to present the investigation as a careful process rather than a frantic chase for answers. However, this approach also creates one of the film's most common criticisms. Several scenes stretch longer than they need to. Conversations that could have delivered their information quickly sometimes linger, repeating points that the audience has already understood. As a result, certain portions of the film begin to feel padded, as though the story is momentarily standing still instead of moving forward. This is particularly noticeable in some of the dialogue-heavy sequences where characters analyze the evidence together. These scenes are important for the narrative, but the extended exchanges occasionally slow the film's momentum. The pacing contrast becomes even clearer when the action scenes appear. When the movie shifts into physical confrontations or chase sequences, the energy spikes dramatically. Suddenly, the story moves quickly again, reminding the viewer that beneath the investigative structure lies a traditional action thriller. But once those moments pass, the film often settles back into its slower rhythm. This push and pull between action and investigation creates a unique viewing experience. At times, the film feels tight and engaging, especially when the plot is revealing new information. At other moments, the pacing can feel uneven, as though the story is stretching itself slightly beyond the material it has to work with. For a mystery-driven thriller, pacing is crucial. Every scene should either deepen the mystery or move the investigation forward. In Jack Reacher, the intention is clear: to build suspense through careful analysis and gradual discovery. Yet for some viewers, the journey to those discoveries feels longer than it needs to be. Still, even with these pacing issues, the film maintains enough intrigue to keep the investigation moving. The audience remains curious about the answers hiding behind the crime, and that curiosity ultimately carries the story forward. At the heart of Jack Reacher lies a screenplay that tries to balance two different identities. On one hand, the film wants to be a thoughtful investigative thriller built around deduction, clues, and careful reasoning. On the other, it also wants to deliver the punchy energy of a traditional action movie. That balancing act is most visible in the film's dialogue. Much of the story unfolds through conversations. Characters discuss evidence, analyze motives, and slowly piece together the mystery surrounding the sniper attack. These dialogue-heavy moments are essential because they guide the audience through the logic of the investigation. Reacher doesn't simply stumble into answers. He talks through them, challenges assumptions, and forces others to reconsider what they think they know. When the writing works, these exchanges feel sharp and engaging. Reacher often speaks with quiet confidence, delivering observations that cut straight to the heart of the problem. His words reveal how his mind operates. Analytical, direct, and always several steps ahead of the people around him. At times, the screenplay also injects small moments of humor or clever one-liners. These lines help break the tension and add personality to the character. They remind the audience that beneath Reacher's stoic exterior is someone who understands the absurdity of certain situations. However, the script doesn't always maintain that level of precision. Some of the dialogue begins to feel overly extended, as though scenes linger longer than necessary. Characters sometimes repeat information that the audience has already grasped, which can slow down the rhythm of the narrative. Instead of moving the story forward, these moments occasionally give the impression that the film is explaining itself too much. There are also instances where the one-liners feel slightly forced. In a film built around a grounded, investigative tone, certain lines stand out as more theatrical than natural. Rather than sounding like organic responses in a tense situation, they sometimes resemble classic action movie quips. This creates an interesting contrast within the screenplay. On one side, there is thoughtful detective-style writing that carefully reveals the mechanics of the mystery. On the other, there are moments where the script leans into familiar genre dialogue, the kind of lines designed to make the hero sound cool in the middle of danger. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but moving between them can occasionally make the tone feel uneven. Still, the screenplay ultimately succeeds in building a coherent narrative around the investigation. The dialogue gives the audience access to Reacher's reasoning and gradually exposes the layers of the conspiracy. Even when certain lines feel a bit exaggerated, they contribute to shaping the film's central character, a man who approaches every problem with quiet certainty. In the end, the script for Jack Reacher functions as both a detective story and an action framework. Its dialogue carries the weight of the mystery, guiding the audience step by step toward the truth hidden beneath the crime. One of the elements that quietly elevates Jack Reacher is its visual style. While the film operates within the framework of a modern action thriller, its cinematography and atmosphere lean toward something far more deliberate and controlled. From the very beginning, the movie establishes a tone that feels almost neo-noir in its presentation. The lighting, the framing, and the locations all work together to create a world that feels tense, shadowy, and slightly mysterious. Instead of bright, glossy visuals typical of many blockbuster action films, Jack Reacher often favors darker environments and grounded urban spaces. The city itself plays an important role in shaping that atmosphere. Many scenes take place in dimly lit streets, quiet parking structures, small offices, and industrial locations that reinforce the feeling that something hidden is unfolding beneath the surface. These environments aren't just backdrops, they contribute to the mood of the investigation, making the world of the film feel both realistic and uneasy. Cinematographer Caleb Deschanel brings a steady and controlled visual language to the movie. The camera rarely feels chaotic or overly stylized. Instead, it moves with purpose, allowing the audience to clearly observe what's happening within each scene. This clarity becomes especially important during the film's action moments. In many modern action movies, rapid editing and shaky camera movements can make it difficult to understand the choreography of a fight or chase. Jack Reacher takes a different approach. The camera stays stable enough that viewers can follow the physical movement of the characters, who is attacking, who is reacting, and how the confrontation unfolds. The result is action that feels tangible. Rather than overwhelming the audience with visual noise, the film allows the tension of each moment to emerge naturally from the scene itself. Whether it's a confrontation in a hallway or a high-speed pursuit through city streets, the cinematography emphasizes clarity and spatial awareness. Another interesting aspect of the visual design is how the film balances movement with stillness. Certain scenes allow the camera to linger, letting the environment and the characters share the frame without rushing the moment. These quieter shots create space for the mystery to breathe. They remind the viewer that the film isn't only about physical action, it's also about observation, deduction, and the slow uncovering of hidden truths. This restrained visual approach gives Jack Reacher a slightly old-school thriller aesthetic. Instead of relying on flashy effects or constant spectacle, the cinematography focuses on atmosphere, composition, and storytelling through the image itself. And in doing so, the film quietly reinforces the tone of its narrative, a grounded investigation unfolding in a world where every detail might hold a clue. In a thriller like Jack Reacher, tension doesn't come from visuals alone. Sound plays a huge role in shaping how the audience experiences every moment, and the film's music and sound design quietly become one of its most effective storytelling tools. The score, composed by Joe Creamer, avoids the typical bombastic style that many modern action movies rely on. Instead of overwhelming the audience with loud orchestral blasts or constant musical energy, the soundtrack takes a far more restrained approach. And that restraint is exactly what makes it powerful. Throughout much of the film, the music feels controlled and deliberate. It doesn't constantly demand attention. Instead, it slips into scenes almost subtly, reinforcing the atmosphere rather than dominating it. The melodies often carry a slightly ominous tone, hinting that something beneath the surface isn't quite right. This approach works especially well during the investigation sequences. As Reacher studies clues and pieces together the mystery, the music builds tension quietly in the background. It creates a sense that the audience is moving deeper into a puzzle, one where every new discovery might reveal something dangerous. But what's just as important as the music itself is how often the film chooses not to use it. Silence becomes a tool. In several scenes, the soundtrack fades away completely, leaving only the natural sounds of the environment, footsteps, distant traffic, the quiet movement of characters through a room. These moments of silence heighten the suspense, forcing the viewer to focus on what's happening without any emotional guidance from the score. When the music finally returns, it feels earned. This careful balance between sound and silence helps the film maintain its tension. Instead of pushing the audience toward excitement at every moment, the soundtrack allows suspense to grow naturally within the scene. It's a subtle technique, but an effective one. In action sequences, the score becomes slightly more energetic, amplifying the urgency of the situation. Yet even then, it avoids turning into pure noise. The music supports the movement on screen rather than trying to overpower it. What emerges from this approach is a soundscape that feels measured and atmospheric, perfectly suited for a story built around investigation, mystery, and controlled bursts of action. In many ways, the soundtrack reflects the character of Jack Reacher himself, calm, deliberate, and always operating with quiet intensity beneath the surface. And by using music sparingly and strategically, the film ensures that every note contributes to the tension of the story rather than simply filling the silence. While Jack Reacher spends a large portion of its time building a mystery, the film never forgets that it is also an action thriller. And when the action finally arrives, it does so with a style that feels deliberate rather than overwhelming. Unlike many modern blockbusters that rely on constant explosions and endless CGI spectacle, Jack Reacher keeps its action grounded. The confrontations feel physical, direct, and often surprisingly controlled. One of the first things viewers notice is that the action scenes don't arrive every few minutes. Instead, they appear at key points in the story, moments where the investigation collides with danger. Because of this, each sequence feels like a release of tension that has been building through the narrative. Take the film's fight scenes, for example. When Reacher faces his opponents, the choreography emphasizes efficiency. He doesn't waste time showing off elaborate moves or dramatic flourishes. The fights are short, sharp, and brutal. Reacher moves with the confidence of someone who knows exactly what he's doing, ending confrontations quickly and decisively. This approach reinforces the character's personality. He isn't fighting for spectacle. He's fighting to remove obstacles standing in the way of the truth. Then there are the larger action moments, like the film's car chase. Instead of turning into a chaotic blur of flashing lights and rapid cuts, the sequence unfolds in a way that allows the audience to follow every turn, every maneuver, and every near collision. The tension comes from the realism of the situation, metal scraping against metal, engines roaring through narrow streets, and the constant sense that one wrong move could end everything. What's refreshing about these sequences is that they never feel exaggerated beyond recognition. The film resists the temptation to turn every moment into an over-the-top spectacle. Instead, it keeps the action rooted in the physical world, where consequences feel immediate and real. Even the smaller confrontations carry weight. A bar fight, a hallway encounter, or a sudden ambush can become memorable simply because the film presents them with clarity and impact. In many ways, the action in Jack Reacher reflects the film's overall tone. It isn't designed to overwhelm the viewer with endless spectacle. Instead, it appears when the story demands it, sharp bursts of intensity breaking through the investigation. And because the movie builds tension before unleashing those moments, the action feels more meaningful when it finally arrives. It's not just action for the sake of excitement. It's action that grows naturally out of the story itself. At its core, Jack Reacher isn't just an action film. It's a thriller built around suspense. The movie isn't constantly trying to overwhelm the viewer with spectacle. Instead, much of its power comes from the slow build of tension as the mystery unfolds. From the moment the investigation begins, the film starts layering questions. Every new piece of information feels like another step deeper into a puzzle that refuses to reveal its full picture all at once. The audience is constantly trying to stay one step ahead, wondering what the next discovery will reveal. And that's where the film's suspense really comes from. The story doesn't rush its revelations. Instead, it gradually introduces twists and developments that reshape the viewer's understanding of the situation. What initially appears to be a straightforward case begins to feel increasingly complicated. Each clue opens the door to another possibility, another hidden connection. This slow unraveling creates a steady sense of anticipation. As Jack Reacher studies the evidence, the audience is drawn into the same process of deduction. We watch him observe details others ignore, question assumptions, and test theories about what might really be happening behind the scenes. And sometimes those discoveries lead to unexpected turns. Moments that seemed insignificant suddenly become important. Characters who appeared harmless start to feel suspicious. The investigation moves forward not through sudden shocks, but through the gradual realization that the truth may be far more dangerous than anyone first imagined. The film also uses timing effectively to sustain that tension. Certain revelations arrive just when the audience thinks they understand the situation. Just as the story appears to settle into a clear direction, a new piece of information disrupts that certainty and pushes the mystery into deeper territory. This constant shifting of perspective keeps the viewer engaged. But like many thrillers, Jack Reacher faces the challenge of maintaining suspense all the way to the end. Early in the film, the tension feels especially strong because so many questions remain unanswered. As the investigation progresses and the pieces begin falling into place, some of that uncertainty naturally fades. Even so, the film manages to keep the audience invested by focusing on the process of uncovering the truth rather than simply delivering shocking twists. In the end, the suspense in Jack Reacher comes less from sudden surprises and more from the steady pressure of the investigation itself, the feeling that every clue brings Reacher closer to exposing something powerful people would rather keep hidden. And that quiet tension is what gives the film its identity as a thriller. As Jack Reacher moves toward its final act, the story reaches the point where every thriller must deliver its biggest payoff. After all the investigation, all the clues, and all the tension that has been carefully building throughout the film, the ending becomes the moment where everything should come together. This is where the film faces one of its most debated aspects. Throughout the movie, the narrative slowly unravels a complicated web of deception. Reacher follows the trail of evidence, uncovering layer after layer of the conspiracy. Each discovery pushes the mystery forward, creating the expectation that the final confrontation will bring a powerful resolution. And for a moment, it seems like the film is heading toward exactly that. The investigation finally exposes the people behind the crime, and the story transitions from deduction to confrontation. The characters who have been operating in the shadows are forced into the open, and Reacher prepares to deal with them directly. But this shift in the narrative changes the tone of the film. Instead of maintaining the same level of suspense that defined the earlier investigation, the final act leans more heavily into straightforward action. The mystery that once drove the story begins to take a back seat as the film focuses on resolving the conflict through physical confrontation. For some viewers, this transition feels satisfying. The hero has spent the entire movie uncovering the truth, and now he must face the people responsible. It delivers the kind of decisive closure many action thrillers aim for. For others, however, the climax feels less impactful than expected. Part of the issue lies in the tension. Earlier in the film, the suspense comes from uncertainty, from the audience trying to understand who is behind the crime and how the pieces fit together. By the time the final confrontation arrives, many of those questions have already been answered. Without that sense of mystery, the climax can feel slightly less intense than the investigation that led up to it. There are also moments in the final act where the resolution appears a bit too convenient. Certain developments seem to arrive quickly, tying up threads that had previously been built with careful detail. This doesn't necessarily break the story, but it does soften the impact of what could have been an even stronger conclusion. Even the final confrontation itself stretches longer than necessary in some places, slowing the momentum just when the story should be reaching its most exciting point. Yet despite these criticisms, the ending still serves its basic purpose. Reacher exposes the truth, confronts the people responsible, and restores a sense of justice to the situation. The story reaches its conclusion in a way that aligns with the character's role as the lone figure who arrives, solves the problem, and moves on. But compared to the tense and carefully constructed investigation that drives most of the film, the final act feels slightly less compelling than the journey that leads to it. And that contrast is what makes the ending of Jack Reacher such an interesting point of discussion. Amid all the investigation, violence, and conspiracy in Jack Reacher, one of the film's most important dynamics is the relationship between Jack Reacher and Helen Roden. Helen enters the story as the defense attorney assigned to represent James Barr, the man accused of carrying out the sniper attack. From the beginning, she approaches the case through the lens of the legal system, evidence, procedure, and due process. Her job is to defend the accused, even when the evidence seems overwhelmingly against him. Then Jack Reacher arrives, and instantly, the dynamic changes. Reacher doesn't operate within the legal framework that Helen is used to. He's not bound by courtroom rules or investigative protocol. Instead, he follows his own instincts, digging into the case in ways that often place him outside the boundaries of the law. This creates an interesting tension between the two characters. Helen represents order, structure, and legality. She wants the truth to emerge through proper channels. Reacher, on the other hand, believes the truth often hides behind those systems. He's willing to bend rules, confront suspects directly, and pursue leads wherever they take him. Despite these differences, the two characters gradually form a working partnership. Helen recognizes that Reacher's unconventional methods might reveal information the official investigation has missed. Reacher, in turn, understands that Helen's position within the legal system provides access and legitimacy he doesn't have. Together, they approach the mystery from two different angles, one legal, one instinctive. Many of their scenes involve the two characters sitting down and analyzing the evidence together, trying to make sense of the scattered clues surrounding the crime. These conversations become an essential part of the investigation, allowing the audience to follow the reasoning behind each new discovery. There are moments of disagreement, moments of skepticism, and moments where Helen questions whether Reacher's methods are too extreme. But there is also a growing respect between them. Interestingly, the film avoids turning their relationship into a traditional romantic subplot. In many action thrillers, a male hero and female ally inevitably drift into a predictable love story. Jack Reacher chooses a different path. The connection between Reacher and Helen remains largely professional, built on trust, shared purpose, and mutual curiosity about the truth. This restraint actually strengthens the dynamic. Instead of distracting the narrative with romance, the film allows their partnership to stay focused on the investigation itself. Helen becomes more than just a supporting character. She becomes an intellectual counterbalance to Reacher's instincts. Their interactions provide some of the film's most important dialogue moments, scenes where the mystery slowly begins to take shape. And through those exchanges, the story gains another layer, the collaboration between two people approaching justice from completely different directions. While Jack Reacher stands at the center of the film, another key figure in the story is Helen Roden, played by Rosamund Pike. As the defense attorney representing the accused sniper, Helen is one of the few characters who works closely with Reacher throughout the investigation. On paper, this role carries significant importance. Helen is positioned right in the middle of the case, balancing legal responsibilities, family pressures, and the growing uncertainty surrounding the evidence. She also has a personal complication that adds tension to the situation. Her father happens to be the district attorney overseeing the prosecution. That alone creates an interesting conflict. Helen is trying to uphold her duty as a lawyer while navigating the expectations of a powerful parent who believes the case against the suspect is already solid. This places her in a difficult position where every decision she makes has both legal and personal consequences. However, the effectiveness of the character ultimately depends on how much the script gives her to work with. Throughout the film, Helen often serves as the audience's entry point into the investigation. She asks questions, challenges Reacher's conclusions, and tries to understand the deeper layers of the case. In theory, this makes her an important counterpart to the protagonist, yet some viewers feel the character never fully develops beyond that function. The screenplay occasionally struggles to define Helen's personality in a clear way. At times, she appears determined and professional, firmly standing by her responsibility as a defense attorney. In other moments, her role shifts into a more passive position, reacting to the events unfolding around Reacher rather than actively shaping them. This inconsistency can make the character feel somewhat underwritten. Rosamund Pike herself brings a composed and intelligent presence to the role, but the dialogue and character direction sometimes limit the range of what she can express. Scenes that could explore Helen's internal conflict more deeply often move quickly back toward the central investigation. As a result, the character occasionally feels like she is standing slightly outside the story rather than fully driving it forward. This doesn't mean her performance lacks value. Pike provides a grounded counterbalance to Reacher's stoic confidence, and their scenes together help frame the investigation in a more rational and analytical way. Her calm delivery and professional demeanor reinforce the idea that Helen is someone who believes strongly in the rule of law. Still, many viewers feel that the character had the potential to be far more compelling. With a bit more depth in the writing, more focus on her motivations, struggles, and perspective, Helen Roden could have become one of the film's most complex figures. Instead, she remains an important but somewhat underexplored part of the narrative. And in a story filled with conspiracies and strong personalities, that leaves the audience wondering what might have been if the character had been given more room to evolve. While Jack Reacher is undeniably centered around Tom Cruise's performance, the film is also filled with a surprisingly strong supporting cast. These actors help populate the world around Reacher, giving the story depth and texture beyond the main investigation. One of the most memorable supporting performances comes from veteran actor Robert Duvall. His character appears later in the film as Cash, a stubborn but reliable owner of a shooting range who becomes an ally to Reacher. Duvall doesn't need a large amount of screen time to leave an impression. With his gruff humor and experienced presence, he brings a sense of authenticity to every scene he's in. It's the kind of performance that quietly enriches the story without demanding the spotlight. Then there's Werner Herzog, whose appearance as the mysterious villain known as the Zek adds an eerie quality to the film. Herzog is primarily known as a filmmaker rather than an actor, but his unusual presence works perfectly for a character meant to feel unsettling and unpredictable. Even when he speaks calmly, there's something chilling about the way he delivers his lines, making his moments on screen particularly memorable. Other members of the cast also contribute to the investigation unfolding around Reacher. Richard Jenkins appears as the district attorney, bringing authority and seriousness to the legal side of the story. His performance adds credibility to the procedural aspects of the investigation, reinforcing the tension between the official narrative of the case and the truth Reacher is trying to uncover. David Oyelowo plays the detective involved in the investigation, giving the character a sharp and determined energy. His role helps anchor the police perspective of the case, creating another layer of interaction as Reacher challenges the conclusions that law enforcement has already reached. And then there's Jai Courtney, who steps into the role of a physical antagonist within the story. His presence adds intensity to the film's confrontational moments, providing Reacher with a direct and dangerous opponent. What makes the supporting cast particularly interesting is the range of personalities they bring to the film. Each character represents a different piece of the world Reacher enters: law enforcement, legal authority, criminal forces, and unexpected allies. However, some viewers have pointed out that many of these actors are given relatively limited screen time. Despite the strength of the cast, the story remains firmly focused on Reacher himself. As a result, several supporting characters appear only briefly before the narrative moves on. Even so, their performances still leave an impact. They provide the structure around which the investigation unfolds, helping to create a believable world where Reacher's search for the truth can take place. And while the film ultimately belongs to its central character, the contributions of the supporting cast help ensure that the story never feels empty around him. Every great thriller needs a villain strong enough to challenge the hero. In Jack Reacher, that role belongs to a mysterious figure known only as the Zek, and from the moment he appears, the film makes it clear that this is not a typical antagonist. Unlike many action movie villains who rely on loud threats or dramatic speeches, the Zek is unsettling in a much quieter way. He speaks calmly, almost softly, but the stories he tells reveal a terrifying past. There's a sense that this is someone who has survived things most people could never imagine, and that survival has shaped him into something cold and ruthless. One of the film's most memorable moments comes when he casually recounts how he lost several of his fingers during his time in a brutal prison camp. The story is delivered with such eerie calmness that it becomes more disturbing than if it had been shouted in anger. It's a moment that immediately defines the character. The Zek isn't simply a criminal mastermind operating from the shadows. He represents a deeper level of menace, someone who has endured suffering and emerged with a warped philosophy about power and survival. The performance by Werner Herzog gives the character a unique presence. Herzog's voice, mannerisms, and deliberate delivery create a villain who feels unpredictable and strangely philosophical at the same time. Even when he's sitting still, there's an uncomfortable tension in the scene, as though danger could surface at any moment. However, the film's handling of the villain is somewhat divided in audience reactions. On one hand, the Zek has the potential to be a deeply memorable antagonist. His backstory, his calm cruelty, and his unsettling personality suggest a character who could dominate the story's darker side. On the other hand, some viewers feel that the film doesn't fully explore that potential. Despite the chilling moments he provides, the character appears only occasionally throughout the narrative. His presence lingers more as a looming threat than as an active force driving the story forward. As a result, the villain's influence sometimes feels more implied than fully developed. Still, whenever the Zek is on screen, the atmosphere changes. His calm, almost philosophical approach to violence creates a different kind of tension than the physical confrontations that occur elsewhere in the film. In a story built around investigation and conspiracy, the Zek represents the dark core of the mystery, the figure whose decisions set the entire chain of events into motion. And even if the film leaves some aspects of the character unexplored, his presence remains one of the most haunting elements of Jack Reacher. To really understand Jack Reacher, it helps to look at where the film sits within the action thriller genre. Because while the movie certainly contains action scenes, chases, and violent confrontations, its identity is a little different from many of the blockbuster action films that dominate modern cinema. In fact, Jack Reacher often feels like a throwback to an older style of thriller. Instead of relying heavily on massive explosions, futuristic gadgets, or endless CGI spectacle, the film focuses on something simpler. Investigation, suspense, and character-driven tension. The story unfolds through clues, conversations, and deduction rather than constant action. That approach places the film closer to classic crime thrillers than to modern superhero-style action movies. You can see influences from earlier films where the hero operates more like a detective than a battlefield warrior. A lone investigator moving through a city, following clues, confronting criminals, and gradually uncovering a larger conspiracy. The pacing is more methodical, and the action scenes are spaced out rather than stacked one after another. At the same time, the film clearly draws inspiration from several well-known action traditions. There are moments that echo the grounded realism of modern espionage thrillers, where the hero relies on skill and intelligence rather than high-tech gadgets. The car chases and physical confrontations also reflect the legacy of classic action cinema, where practical stunts and real locations create a sense of authenticity. This mixture gives Jack Reacher a hybrid identity, part detective story, part action film, part conspiracy thriller, but that position within the genre also leads to one of the film's most common criticisms. For viewers who have seen many thrillers before, the structure of the story can feel familiar. The lone hero uncovering a hidden conspiracy, the investigation that gradually exposes powerful enemies, the final confrontation where justice is delivered. These are elements that have appeared in countless films over the years. Because of that familiarity, Jack Reacher doesn't necessarily reinvent the genre. Instead, it embraces the conventions that already exist, and for some viewers, that's exactly what makes the film enjoyable. It delivers a straightforward thriller built on recognizable storytelling techniques, the kind of movie that focuses on atmosphere and tension rather than trying to overwhelm the audience with spectacle. In a cinematic landscape filled with increasingly complex franchises and larger-than-life superheroes, Jack Reacher almost feels refreshingly traditional. It doesn't try to redefine the action genre. It simply aims to deliver a solid, well-crafted thriller in the style of the classics that came before it. After examining all the elements that make up Jack Reacher, the mystery, the investigation, the performances, and the action, the final question becomes simple. Is the movie actually entertaining? And for many viewers, the answer is yes, but with some important qualifications. Jack Reacher is the kind of film that doesn't necessarily aim to redefine the action thriller genre. It doesn't try to shock audiences with groundbreaking ideas or push the boundaries of cinematic storytelling. Instead, it focuses on delivering a solid, straightforward thriller built on familiar ingredients. You have a mysterious crime, a lone investigator with exceptional skills, a conspiracy hiding beneath the surface, and a series of confrontations leading to the truth. Those ingredients have formed the backbone of countless thrillers before. But when they are combined in the right way, they can still create a movie that's engaging from start to finish. That's largely what Jack Reacher manages to do. Even when the story becomes predictable at times, the film maintains enough intrigue to keep viewers curious about where the investigation will lead next. The mystery surrounding the sniper attack, the gradual uncovering of hidden motives, and the steady presence of Jack Reacher himself give the narrative enough momentum to carry it forward. Tom Cruise's performance also plays a major role in the film's entertainment value. Whether audiences fully accept him as the character or not, his screen presence provides the movie with energy and confidence. He anchors the story with the kind of intensity that keeps scenes engaging even when the pacing slows down. The supporting cast adds another layer of interest as well. Characters move in and out of the story, creating a world that feels populated by allies, suspects, and adversaries, all contributing to the unfolding mystery. And when the film does shift into action, those moments deliver bursts of excitement that break up the investigative tone. The fights are sharp, the confrontations feel physical, and the occasional chase sequence injects adrenaline into the narrative. Taken together, these elements create a film that may not be revolutionary, but it remains consistently watchable. For viewers looking for a complex cinematic masterpiece, Jack Reacher might not fully satisfy those expectations. But for those who enjoy a classic-style thriller, a movie where a tough investigator follows the trail of a crime until the truth finally comes to light, the film provides a solid and entertaining experience. In the end, Jack Reacher succeeds in doing what many thrillers aim to do, keeping the audience engaged long enough to see how the mystery unfolds. And sometimes, that's exactly what a good thriller needs to accomplish. One of the most interesting storytelling choices in Jack Reacher is the way the film handles its mystery. In many crime thrillers, the central question is simple: who committed the crime? The entire narrative builds toward the moment when the killer is finally revealed, but Jack Reacher takes a different approach. From very early in the film, the audience is shown who carried out the sniper attack. The shooter is not hidden behind layers of secrecy or disguised as an unknown suspect waiting to be exposed later in the story. Instead, the film shifts the focus of the mystery entirely. The real question is no longer who did it. The real question becomes why it happened, and that small change completely alters the structure of the story. By revealing the shooter early, the film turns the investigation into something deeper than a traditional whodunit. The audience already knows that the man accused of the crime may not be the true mastermind behind it. What remains hidden is the motive, the reason this attack occurred, and the forces that may have orchestrated it. This approach transforms the narrative into a conspiracy thriller. As Jack Reacher begins examining the case, he isn't just searching for the person who pulled the trigger. He's trying to understand the larger mechanism behind the crime. Every clue points toward the possibility that the shooting was only one piece of a much larger plan. The victims may not have been chosen randomly. The evidence may have been arranged deliberately. And the suspect currently blamed for the massacre might be nothing more than a carefully positioned scapegoat. Because the audience already knows certain details about the crime, the suspense comes from watching Reacher slowly uncover the hidden connections. Each discovery moves the story closer to the people who truly benefit from the chaos created by the attack. This narrative structure allows the film to focus on investigation rather than surprise. Instead of waiting for a shocking reveal at the end, the tension builds as the audience watches Reacher close in on the truth step by step. The mystery becomes a puzzle, not about identifying the killer, but about exposing the system that allowed the crime to happen. And that's what gives Jack Reacher its particular style of suspense. The film doesn't hide the crime from the viewer. It challenges the viewer to understand the deeper story behind it. Whenever Hollywood introduces a new action hero, there's often a bigger plan behind the scenes. Studios aren't just making a single film, they're hoping to launch a character that audiences will follow for years. And when Jack Reacher arrived, it was clear that the movie was being positioned with that exact possibility in mind. After all, the source material already existed. Lee Child's book series had produced numerous novels featuring the character, each one presenting a new mystery, a new location, and a new set of enemies for Reacher to confront. From a cinematic perspective, that kind of structure is perfect for a long-running franchise. A lone drifter traveling from place to place, solving problems and exposing conspiracies. It's a formula that can easily generate multiple stories. In other words, Jack Reacher wasn't just introducing a character. It was potentially introducing a series. The film itself reflects that idea in subtle ways. Reacher is portrayed as a man without permanent ties, someone who appears where he's needed and disappears once the situation is resolved. This nomadic lifestyle naturally allows the story to continue in new settings, with new mysteries waiting somewhere down the road. It's the kind of character who can step into almost any situation. However, creating a successful franchise depends on more than just having the right structure. Audiences need to feel invested in the character enough to want to follow them into future stories. And this is where reactions to Jack Reacher become mixed. Some viewers appreciated the film as a solid introduction to the character. They saw potential in the idea of watching Reacher tackle different conspiracies in future installments. The combination of investigation, action, and a mysterious protagonist suggested that there was more ground to explore, but other viewers finished the film with a different feeling. While they enjoyed the story itself, they weren't necessarily convinced that they needed to see many more adventures featuring this particular version of the character. The movie delivered a complete narrative, but it didn't always create the sense of anticipation that fuels a long-running franchise. Still, the attempt was clearly there. The world of Jack Reacher was designed to be expandable, a platform where new stories could easily emerge. And in the landscape of modern cinema, where studios constantly search for the next long-term action series, the character certainly had the ingredients for one. The question was never whether Reacher could support multiple stories. The real question was whether audiences would want to follow him into them. One of the biggest debates surrounding Jack Reacher began long before audiences even saw the film. It wasn't about the story. It wasn't about the direction. It was about one simple question: was Tom Cruise the right actor to play Jack Reacher? Fans of Lee Child's novels had a very specific image of the character. In the books, Reacher is described as a massive figure, extremely tall, broad-shouldered, physically imposing. He's the kind of man who intimidates people the moment he walks into a room. In other words, he's built like a giant. Tom Cruise, on the other hand, has never fit that description. Compared to the literary version of Reacher, Cruise is noticeably smaller in stature. And when the casting announcement was first made, many readers immediately reacted with skepticism. For them, the character's physical presence was a crucial part of who Reacher was, a towering figure who could dominate a confrontation without even speaking. From that perspective, Cruise simply didn't match the image they had carried in their minds for years. But Hollywood often approaches casting from a different angle. While physical accuracy matters, star power can sometimes matter even more. Tom Cruise wasn't just another actor being considered for the role, he was one of the most recognizable action stars in the world. His name alone could draw audiences, and his experience in action films gave the studio confidence that he could carry the movie. And once the film began production, the filmmakers worked carefully to bridge the gap between the book version and the cinematic version. Through camera angles, staging, and performance style, the film presents Cruise's Reacher as someone who commands attention through presence rather than sheer size. Instead of relying on physical intimidation alone, this version of the character uses intelligence, confidence, and calculated calmness to dominate situations. The idea becomes clear. This Reacher doesn't need to be the biggest man in the room. He just needs to be the most dangerous. For some viewers, this reinterpretation works. They see Cruise's intensity and screen presence as enough to embody the character's authority. His confidence and composure create a version of Reacher who feels controlled, analytical, and capable. For others, however, the physical difference remains difficult to ignore. They feel that the character loses part of his original identity when that towering physicality disappears, and that debate continues to shape discussions about the film. In the end, Jack Reacher presents an interesting example of how literary characters evolve when they move from page to screen. The version audiences see in the film may not match the exact description from the novels, but it represents Hollywood's interpretation of the character, shaped not only by the source material, but also by the star who brings him to life. One of the defining traits of Jack Reacher as a character is his reputation as a formidable fighter. In the story, he's not just an investigator, he's a former military man with extensive training, someone who can handle himself in dangerous situations without hesitation.